Hey folks, I'm talking today on Sunday, December 19th at 7 p.m. Pacific time about the Venus retrograde cycle. It just started. It's going to be going from now until January 29th. Venus is retrograde about 40 days every 18 months or so. And I'm going to be talking about that for all 12 signs, including yours. I'm going to see how it's going to affect you, whether you're a Cancer or a Virgo or Pisces, whatever it is. I'm going to give an overview of how this is going to affect you. First, in general, what Venus retrograde means, what Venus is essentially, and how each of the 12 signs are going to experience it. So before I get to that, though, I do want to let people know that I have the 2020 Vedic astrology forecast finished. This is a free forecast for the 10 most important shifts of 2022. And as you'll see, one of the first ones is Venus turning direct in Sagittarius on January 29th. So from this point forward here on December 19th, Venus is going to be retrograde until almost February. So as you see, this is one of the big shifts that you need to be prepared for in 2022. Venus turning direct in Sagittarius, and that's going to happen at the end of January. Again, so this is one of the big shifts to be prepared for, because we're starting with Venus retrograde. Then we go through, the nodes change signs, Aries, Libra axis. This is going to be pretty intense time. Jupiter moves into Pisces. Again, I also talk about that for all 12 signs in this free forecast. And Saturn pokes its head in Aquarius. Then we have the solar eclipse in Aries at the end of April. Then we have Mars and Rahu very close, cosmic blowups and war. This could be a very contentious time globally and domestically about all these things we're fighting over and we're so polarized over. This is going to be a pretty intense shift. Then Saturn and Jupiter both retrograde, then solar eclipse in Libra. Then we have a fiery Mars retrograde at the end of the year. So these are 10 very important things that are coming up in 2022, right around the corner. And so that's free. You can just go ahead and register for it. I just dropped the link in the chat box. So again, today I'm going to be talking about this this Venus retrograde for all of us. Now, this is part of a cycle, and Venus goes retrograde 5 times every 8 years. And this one we're experiencing now is also related to one that happened about 8 years ago when Venus went retrograde. Now, you see it's going retrograde at about 2 degrees, 19 minutes of sidereal Capricorn. About 5 years ago, look, this is December 19th, but you go back December 21st, 2013, about 8 years ago, almost to the day, Venus went retrograde, but it was at 4:55 Capricorn, about 5 degrees. Here it's 2 degrees 19, so about 2.5 degrees further along, back toward the west. The eclipses happen. The retrograde cycles of Venus happen. So you see they're very consistent, almost to the day, 8 years later, and almost at the exact same point. This one today on December 19th, 2021 is at 2:19 of Capricorn. On December 21st, 2013, almost 8 years to the day, it was also Capricorn, but 4:55 of Capricorn, both in Uttara Ashada Nakshatra. So think back to your relationships and what was going on even at like 8 years ago. This is the first place to start with you, for all of us, I guess. This Venus retrograde happened 8 years ago at early degrees of Capricorn, sidereal, of course. And that's the same one that's happening now. But of course, other things are in a different placement and whatnot. And so this is a quick sort of map. Now, these are tropical placements. Again, if you slide this wheel over like 23 degrees, then you wind up getting the sidereal placements. But as you see, it just keeps tracing this pentagram every 5 years, or I'm sorry, every year and a half. It winds up going retrograde within a couple degrees of where it retrograded 8 years earlier. So within the course of your life, Venus is going to go retrograde in the same like 5 positions, right? Which is pretty interesting. And if you look at it from Earth, you can see it traces out this kind of Rosetta pattern. Again, if we're on Earth and we're looking up in the sky, it looks like this if you were to extend this, if you were to flatten it out rather than, have it be circular. But of course, the Earth is flat. Sorry. So from the flat Earth, because we're standing on a flat Earth, when we look up into the flat sky, it looks like this. No, but it would carve out this Rosetta pattern. Literally, even looks like a rose, right? This is what the pattern actually looks like if you were to see a diagram. There's some really cool diagrams on YouTube that shows that motion from a geocentric point of view. And by the way, you can go back to the writings of Claudius Ptolemy, thousands of years ago, in his book Almagest. He explained these synodic cycles and these it just flew out of my head, the cycles, the epicycles. Sorry, I'm saying, am I going to forget? It was just in my head. All the planets and their epicycle orbits. How he explained these things from a geocentric point of view. So it's very interesting and worth looking into. This astronomy is very important to understand. And again, it's always important to look at these cycles within cycles and think about what was going on with you 8 years ago and this Venus retrograde cycle. I remember it pretty clearly, and the isolation and other things that happened at that time. And so feels somewhat similar now, although quite different. But at the time with me, I just had both parents die, one the year before and then one this year, or that particular year. And the relationship at the time, was as cold and sudden and shockingly ended as those events. So it reinforced a lot of things. And, again, for me as Gemini, it was in my 8th house. So, these are the things I'm going to be talking about today with each of the signs of how you could experience this. But again, Venus retrograde cycles are really a time to introspect about your agreements, the price you're willing to pay to be with someone, let's say, how much you're able to give, how much you want to give, how much you enjoy giving, and again, what's the price you're willing to pay in order to have the connection? That's often the big, that's the big kind of fulcrum of the lever, right? We either feel like we're paying too high of a price to get back what we're getting, which is the happiness and pleasure, or we feel like, or we're not giving enough at all, and we're kind of just going from one, desire to another, unsatisfied. Either way, Venus winds up, in one way or another, trying to alert us to the real source of bliss and happiness, which is not found externally, but it's found within our own heart, and something that no one can give us, no person can give us, because that's the first place we look for it, especially, Venus retrograde cycles bring this out, that we're all kind of, beggars at the table of love, at least romantic love, where we all feel like beggars. And we're really beggars because we're begging for some kind of, desire and happiness and, some kind of, graphic, some kind of gratification, I should say, that, and some kind of attraction and sensuality and these kinds of things that really skews the perspective. And we often don't look at the sort of desire aspect of Venus. And if we're going to be really honest about what it is that really skews the perspective of our relationships, that's in many ways the first place to start is, notice how much of our relationship, and I mean like romantic relationships, is just purely driven by attraction and, sexuality, even if it's not physical sex, the sex act. Underneath it all, that's really what it's about. Again, women tend to complicate it more and be like, oh no, it's more about this kind of thing. But ultimately, it's just a more subtle version of that. If there's no attraction, however you define that, maybe it's not as physical or visual or whatever it might be, but it's still the same kind of thing. Attracted to the mind or the whatever it might be, confidence and all of those other things that women do the same thing over. But it winds up being, with men, it winds up being much more just concentrated around maybe the form of the Venus and the beauty of the woman and the nice and the, something more obvious. With women, it's something more subtle, let's say, but it's the same thing. Attracted to it and wanting to merge with it and wanting, let's say, the other person to like us, wanting to do things to get them to like us so that we get the attention we want. So men and women do this performative dance of, women make themselves beautiful and I'm nice and friendly, see, friendly and beautiful. I'm Venus, see, friendly, beautiful. And men are like, I'm powerful, I'm confident, I have money, I'm nice, I'm, smart and funny and all the things that men have been conditioned to see that women want us to do. And women do all the things they want the man to do, or that they think the man's going to respond to. And so we do these things, and then, but we mainly are doing it for the one or the two or the ones that we want to give us the attention that we want from them. And then we start having a relationship, let's say, and then we're going to sort of keep doing those things, but then we stop doing them as much. And then we start to see the other person and we think, is this effort I have to put into it worth what I'm getting back? All this stuff I'm doing because I want the attention, because I want the interaction, I want the enjoyable interaction, the sex, the approval of the powerful man who thinks I'm beautiful, thinks I'm whatever. And for the man, it's the, the reflection back of the beautiful woman or whatever it is. I'm going to do things to get that. Remember, first, it's about you and what you're getting. That's why. Don't ever fool yourself that, oh no, you're willing to do anything and you're so, self-sacrificial in relationships. No, you're not. You're as self-interested and motivated as everybody else. You're doing all of that stuff and compromising and giving them everything they want so that they'll give you what you want. Don't confuse it, okay? Whatever the trade-offs are, you're doing them because of what you get. And there's nothing wrong with that. But some of the biggest delusions around Venus is this idea that, oh no, I would do anything for love for that person. No, we won't. No, not in romantic relationships. We'll do that for children. We'll do that where there's true love and pure love, where we don't expect anything in return. We'll do it for the dog, and you'll do anything for the dog. And the cat, you love the dog and the cat selflessly. The dog and the cat can poop on the floor, can scratch your face, can do anything, and you'll still love it and take care of it. The boyfriend does it every time. The boyfriend doesn't give you back exactly what you think you deserve based on everything you did to get what you think you deserve. Even if it's off a smidgen, even if you do 95% of effort and it comes back 92%, you're like, oh, what about that 3%? I did 95%. You only gave me back 92. You're going to notice. We're always noticing if the thing we're doing is giving us the thing we think we should get in return. We're always evaluating that with Venus. Now, this is a very transactional part of the romantic relationship. This is why I'm talking about it on that level right now, because that's the thing that we really notice, or we should really be noticing with Venus retrograde, is how much of that are we actually, how much of this, first of all, how much are we dialed into our values and those things that we won't do? And those things that if we do them, no matter what the person reflects back, we're not going to like it. See, this is where things really get difficult, is people wind up, when people don't know themselves very well, this is why in relationships, the most important thing they say is the relationship with yourself. And I do this because, these are the kinds of things we hear and we say to ourselves, well, the most important relationship is the relationship with yourself. It's true. But what does that mean once you get in front of somebody who you want to like you? Someone who you're really attracted to, and where in your mind you'll almost do anything to get that response from them. Then how much do you really know yourself? That's when it gets hard. Everybody really knows themselves when they're alone, but what if that person that you imagine, that fantasy person, think about it. Think about that person right now that, oh my God, it would be incredible to be with that person. I know many of you are thinking it's me. I know. You're thinking, oh, Sam, oh God. Trust me, it wouldn't be as good as you think. Be the worst mistake of your life. Trust me. No, but think of like, oh, that person that I would do anything to be with that person, right? And again, I'm not trying to make fun of it, because we have this like fantasy person, like there's a couple in my mind right now. I'm thinking, wow, like really like this person. What if you got around them and and in order to get along or to be with them, like you could do it, but you had to kind of turn yourself into something that you don't like, but you would get that response. You would get that sex or that approval or that, oh, if this person likes me, then I must really be something. You're getting your value and your sense of self-worth from that other person. That's where we get lost. And that's what leads to the resentments in our agreements. And some people don't know themselves at all, except for their connections to other people. Their entire definition, they're totally defined by the reflections that come back from other people and how much they can make others happy. And then the resentment comes because the opposite of Venus is that Mars, which then says, now I'm angry. All the things I did to try to make you happy. And again, the illusion around, I would have done anything and I compromised everything to try to make you happy and you still didn't appreciate it. Again, if we're in that mindset and we're giving up things that we're going to now resent the other person for, that's our problem. And once we start doing that, no matter what happens, we're going to resent the other person. We're going to project and blame them. So this is the reason I even kind of led up to all of that is you have to understand, anytime you don't, in any way that you don't know yourself and you're having an interaction and you compromise, quote, or you give up something that is too far, that is against your values in any way, more than likely, you're going to blame the other person for it. You're going to think that they told you to do that they did that to you. This is part of you not knowing yourself well enough, because you're the one going in with the not knowing yourself very well idea, for example. So you not knowing yourself and thinking, oh, that's what they want from me. Okay, I'll do that. You're automatically thinking that they wanted you or they somehow coerced you when you're the one who did it. So to resent them later is almost certainly going to happen. This is why, as you get older, I know with myself, the first things I look at when I meet, let's say, a potential person to date is how well they know themselves and how much they seem to be wanting to get me to like them, and phony behavior and all of this. I'm like, right away, I can see all the stuff they're going to do that they're going to blame me for at some point. Like, this person doesn't know themselves very well. Now, then we have the other problem on the other side of it, is where we, quote, know ourselves so well that we can't compromise at all. That everything feels like a loss of our own power when we get to being around another person, right? Where it's the other problem, where we're kind of like a fortress. Or as soon as a relationship requires us to bend a little bit or do this or that, or again, compromise really on almost anything, like we get so locked into our routine and ourself and all of this that any kind of ask feels like a big ask. Then we're not going to have a connection either. And by the way, none of these necessarily are problems either. There's no necessary problem to any of it. You know, especially as people get older, these things become quite different, especially romantic relationships. One second. Because being by ourselves or whatever and elevating that sort of interaction becomes much easier. You know, the desire for sexuality or to get turned on or to even literally define ourselves by what other people say becomes much less, right? So when we get older, we can settle more into a sort of transcendent relationship with Venus and with others and with all of that. It also doesn't revolve around, you know, again, things like trying to prove something to ourself that we could get this person or whatever else it might be. That also skews the whole kind of relationship dynamic around Venus. So then we get into a sort of higher dimension, which is not so rajasic. And Venus has this rajasic energy, this energy of that sort of, you know, turn on pleasure and all of that, becomes elevated into something more transcendent, as I said. And that would be things like finding beauty in things that are more sublime, things that are less sensual, things that are less personal. And we become less interested in being possessive. This is probably the biggest difficulty with Venus energy, is the possessiveness part of it. And so rather than finding that happiness and that beauty in all things, as you've probably heard me say many times, we're here to be happy for no reason, which is very much a symbol of Venus and Pisces. But in that case, Pisces is where we don't own anything. We don't possess anything. We don't have our arms around it. And we don't feel like we're the owner, especially of the other person, or that our happiness is dependent upon the other person, right? Which is when we get into a big Venus problem in relationships. That's in many ways symbolized by the Venus in Virgo, for example. And so the possessiveness of Venus is really one of the biggest lessons. And this, you know, Venus comes at the end of the planetary succession. There's only one planet left, which is Saturn, after Venus. And Venus comes at that point to really show us how to elevate that possessive desire quality and the fear and stress and worry that those things that make us happy are contingent upon something external, especially another person. So when Venus goes retrograde, again, it's a very internal process. And that internal process shows where we reflect upon these things, these themes I'm talking about, from a very sort of attached and stimulated desire to, you know, have sex and enjoy ourselves and be happy and excited. And again, it's not just sex, but to enjoy that's a very urgent quality of the Venus, as urgent as sex is. But the attraction and the beauty and the happiness and the joy that comes with that connection with another person, again, which is a very juicy, alive kind of state with people. We will have this idea that we want to be with other people, right? In a very intense way and intimate way with Venus and the relationships, the romantic relationships, to things that are less charged, like our other social and civic relationships that we have, to things that are even beyond the sort of cultural, social harmony that we imagine with Venus. And to something even more transcendent than that, which is our relationship with beauty itself in a natural sense, like nature. Again, things where we find beauty in something that we're not trying to possess. Again, I used the example earlier about children or dogs, our pets or whatever. We don't have as much charge, or even our friends. Again, not our lovers, but our friends. When our lovers and partners are like our friend, or when they're friends, there's a much better chance that those relationships will also survive. And so, again, that's also much less possessive. You're not possessive of your friends. You're just supportive. You love them. You'll try to help them, but you don't feel like you own them. You're not trying to define yourself through them. But again, then to something even more transcendent than that, and to something that's just the bliss of the soul, which is just the bliss and joy of being alive, where we're happy for no reason. We're just, because being alive is a blissful state. We could be in a blissful state. Just life itself is a blissful state once we get out of all of that. And we can really see those people, that even our relationship partners and those who we had a lot of charge and possessiveness around, we can also see them with more discrimination, with more detachment, with less emotion and charge at this time with Venus retrograde. It definitely has that quality as well, because what happens is Venus goes from being an evening star like it is now, and where it's as far away from the sun as it usually is, about a full Rashi, about a full sign away. And then what it does is it goes back into the sun. It disappears in the rays of the sun, as you might say, sort of gets burned up in the sun. Then it emerges on the other side as a morning star in 40 days. So if everything were to stay still here, Venus, after 40 days, it would be all the way over here on the other side. Now, by the way, all the planets do that when they're retrograde. Mercury goes retrograde like that too. The other planets, they don't get burned up in the sun this way. Only the two inner planets do, I should say. Mercury and Venus both disappear and then emerge on the other side. But with Venus, it's very dramatic, because with Mercury, the other inner planet, we can't see it most of the time. Mercury is so small and so close to the sun. Most of the time, we don't see Mercury. We see Venus, though. Look up in the sky right now. It's as bright as it gets right before it goes retrograde. It's very bright. And it's very bright once it starts to turn direct as well, right? But especially, but as it gets closer, as it's at its closest point to the Earth in its retrograde cycle, it's totally burnt up. So when Venus and the sun join at the exact point of its most retrograde, it'll be the closest to the Earth at that time, but it'll also be completely burned up in the rays of the sun from where we're looking at it. So this motion is also, symbolized in the Greek pantheon of Persephone, and going to hell and back, going down into the hell and then emerging with greater devotion and things like that. So there's a lot of symbolism in Western mythology of Persephone going into hell, with Hades and that story. So it really shows how from this outer, place where we're starting, and its sort of maximum elongation to its immersion into you say like the underworld, to its rising again on the other side, is really that path of Venus when it goes retrograde for these 40 days. So as we say, it starts in Capricorn, then it goes back into Sagittarius on, I believe it's the 29th of December, or the 30th of December, 29th, 30th of December, it goes back into Sagittarius. So this is really a Capricorn to Sagittarius shift as well. And so Venus starting in Capricorn means that we're really starting this retrograde cycle with that kind of serious focus, right? We're very serious about the, about these things that I'm discussing, our compromises, our boundaries, how we have, put forth these boundaries in our life, in our lifetime with others, and the compromises that we make, etc. And how our boundaries play into that, how other kinds of compromises that we make also play into this whole thing. And it goes back into Sagittarius, which has to do with higher lessons, higher wisdom, and also a transcendent possibility, because this nature of Venus as going back into Jupiter signs isn't so different from the Venus exaltation point in Pisces. Again, they're both ruled by Jupiter. And so it's a great opportunity and possibility, especially at the beginning of the year, after Venus goes direct. Let me just put it here for a second. I'll just look. Oops. After Venus goes direct at the end of December, at the end of January, and then Venus goes back into by early February, Venus goes back into Capricorn again, but after having gone through Sagittarius. So you can see some very distinct patterns between now, which is like December 19th, and December 29th, which is for these 10 days, Venus is retrograde in Capricorn. So it could be quite serious about these themes I'm talking about. And it's really a good time for you to reflect and be mature, be responsible, mature, and grown up about these things that I talked about before. Really be grown up about your ownership of the agreements that you've made, how much you've given away your power and then blamed the other person for it, let's say, or you've been very rigid and unwilling to compromise, and this is why you're alone. Most of the time, this is why it doesn't work out. As soon as you're asked to do any little thing, your boundaries are so tight. And versions within this, many of us are, much more balanced than these extremes. But no matter how balanced we are, the relationships vacillate between these extremes. Every negotiated relationship does. Friendships, business partnerships. Venus is the one that really legislates all of those adult interactions. So for the 10 days beginning between now and December 29th, really be mature about these things. It might not hurt to apologize to people, maybe that you have wronged. And again, you don't need to feel guilt like you've destroyed the world. Or again, now we tend to turn everything into some I was guilted and shamed, and a guilt and a shame, and I have to forgive myself for the guilt and the shame and all. Guilt and shame and whatnot are Capricorn themes, and some things we need to feel ashamed of. We've all done things that are somewhat shameful. and we don't apologize for it. And then we wonder why people don't want to talk to us anymore, or why people don't trust us. We all make mistakes, but usually people are forgiving of mistakes when there's honest contrition. So maybe it's good to look at those things and introspect, even if the other person doesn't forgive you or whatever, to have contrition about those things and release the karma. This is one of the best ways to be mature and release the karma. People talk about these things a lot. Oh, it's time to get real and look at these things and face these things. And then people don't really face them. They face them within themselves, and it's all this stuff. But people don't then show up and really be responsible for it, which is to be responsible for those actions that you've done that were less than you're capable of. And literally, not just in your own mind, but literally humble yourself, key Saturn word, humble yourself to the people you've wronged at times, when maybe because you didn't know yourself very well, you compromised and made agreements that you then resented them for. Then you were cold and mean and maybe sort of cut them out of their life out of this anger and frustration, when really it was you generating most of it. And again, you don't have to humble yourself like you've done some terrible thing, but maybe just open up a dialogue about it and say, you know what, I've been thinking about this stuff. And, you know, at the time when we had that relationship or had those things, you know, I really was in a very different place than I am now. And if I feel like I remember back at times when I was, acted certain ways, and I really wouldn't act that way now. And if I did hurt your feelings or accuse you of things or blame you for things that you really didn't intend or whatever, I remember some of our fights. If that's the case, I'm really sorry. And I hope that we can blah, 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 or something. It's very healing to get these things off your chest. That's the real sign of being mature. Not just, oh yeah, I really work through stuff and it's all your own emotions and you're just going through something and you don't ever bring it out. You don't ever do anything to really make amends for it. Because by the way, those are the different levels of karma. And if you don't ever make amends for the things you've done, I mean, literally the things you've done, the things you've said, the ways you've brought things into people, the karma doesn't work out yet on that level. Karmas don't work out until you work them out on the level that they were enacted. So in other words, if you've actually brought these things out and again, done these things in your relationships with people, even if you think you've worked through it yourself and worked through the karma yourself, you have to work it out with that, or else it's going to come back to you until you work it out and you do it and you actually make amends for it with that person or with another person or something. That's really what working out the karma is, because really that's the karma of having to humble yourself. If you can't humble yourself and apologize, that's a different level of karma than I made all these relationship mistakes. Okay, well, you made these relationship mistakes. That's one thing. But then now you're working, maybe the relationship mistakes are also coupled with, and I have too much pride and arrogance to ever apologize and make things right. Maybe they're not the same thing. These are different levels. So again, part of the Venus retrograde in Capricorn also is the karma to be able to humble ourselves and be humbled and not just feel ashamed and feel like, well, what if I apologize and they don't do anything? And we get all nervous and weird and, oh my, I feel guilt and shame or whatever it might be. So that's one of the biggest things with the Venus in Capricorn as well, is to really feel that responsibility and really have ownership for it. And then it goes back into Sagittarius, of course. Now, Sagittarius is the sign of the teacher, of the guru, of the higher wisdom, where we can feel that transcendent possibility, where it's more of a transcendent thing and more of a, where there's much more devotion to a higher, message and a higher lesson than just the romantic situation. But it can also show where, again, because Venus as a relationship planet, it also shows when Venus is in Sagittarius, particularly, we can also really look at our kind of, disappointments. And we can really be aware of how we projected a lot of hope onto someone. And then when they disappointed us, again, we maybe held them accountable because, how dare you not live up to my fantasy of you? Look at what you did. You lied to me. You acted like you were this way and you're really that way. Is that really true? Maybe you just had a fantasy that wasn't real. Maybe the person didn't portray themselves that way. Maybe in your mind, you portrayed them that way. And you made all these compromises. And then when that didn't work out, instead of owning that, you blamed them. Oh, you acted like you were such a big thing. Maybe they didn't. I mean, maybe they did, but either way, notice the whole soulmate projection fantasy as well. And this is a big part of Venus in Sagittarius, is the projection onto the, oh, you're guru, you're my God, you're this relationship is going to save me. It's my savior. And by extension, you're my savior. And then it's like when it doesn't, when it actually requires work and it actually requires that you look at yourself as well. And when it's not all about just fulfilling your projection, you get mad and want to take your ball home and blame the other person. Again, this is such a common theme in relationships. It happens so much. So these are big themes right now. So they work on both levels. It can both be the responsibility for, being humbled by our mistakes and making amends for them and being mature, and also the sort of projections that we get into, but also the higher level where instead of projecting all of that, we're gracious, we're graceful. We see that the person is a divine being. And we also see that we're a divine being and our bliss comes from a divine source. And rather than try to possess and own the person and our projection and then get mad when it doesn't work, we see it as a great learning opportunity and as a great inspiring part of life where we can connect with the beauty of things that are transcendent. And then when Venus goes back into Capricorn in early February, having gone through that sort of trial by fire, and Venus going through that sort of underworld purification process, which is really what the retrograde is, that sort of purification process, we're now purified in that. So again, often when the retrograde is happening, there's a lot of confusion about this stuff. So again, between now and the end of January, there's that retrograde, maybe confusion around these themes. Then when it starts to move forward, we can have more clarity around these things. So after January 29th, Venus starts moving forward. And then by early February, we could start to get more perspective on these things. And like, oh yeah, trying to find God in a partner or something and just falling short because I'm outside of myself and I don't have good teachings. I don't have good discrimination. And so, yes, I get that. And I'm willing to be humble and grateful. Capricorn is one of the best signs for relationship influences because it is where we're practical and grateful and humble. One second. And where we appreciate the hard work that goes into it. We're willing to do the hard work to make, let's say, even a relationship work. But more importantly, we're humbled by life and we appreciate, Venus in Capricorn, a person will often have great appreciation for the sacrifices of others and for the attempts that others make to try to get along. This is one of the things that's sad to me is when people, especially at the end of a long relationship where it's obvious that two people really tried to get along. And then, maybe one or both of them is just determined to demonize the other. No, the whole thing was your fault. Every compromise I also made with my eyes open for, 10 years was also your fault. You were wrong for everything you did and everything I did. It's just so absurd, right? Again, and I'm excluding things like someone was beating the shit out of somebody else or whatever. I'm not talking about that. That's not most relationships. I'm talking about the normal give and take that people have. And it's just such a wasted opportunity when one person has to like, oh no, they were wrong for everything. Everything they did and everything I did. I did nothing. It's like such a fragile, weak, unaccountable, perspective. I'm not judging it. I'm saying, but there's no growth in that. There's no real, you're not working through anything if this is how you look at it. That you're just a victim of every choice you made for like 10 years or 15 years or whatever it might be. So these are the things that we can really be working through and looking at for the next couple of months. This is big. It goes into February, for much of February of 2022. Where are we at? Oh, no, I'm sorry, through March. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I've been saying early February. It's actually early March. Excuse me. Every time I've been saying Venus goes back into Capricorn early February, it's actually early March. Excuse me. I'm sorry about that. I should have looked more. It's early March. So then Venus doesn't finish its transit through Capricorn until almost the end of March. So again, this is going on for quite a while. Sorry, I should have looked more closely. So it's not early February. It's early March. I thought that was wrong because it's like, how could that be? It turns direct at the end of January and then early February, it's back in Capricorn. No, it turns direct at the end of January and then early March, it goes into Capricorn. So again, much of from December 29th until like March, till like March. So that's like pretty much all of February. Venus is moving forward in Sagittarius. Then it goes through Capricorn in March. So again, a lot of shifting and changing around these things. So let's talk about the 12 signs here. And again, I'm just going to be talking about these two signs, or these two houses. So for Aries, it's going in between your 9th and 10th houses. So it's also going to have a very strong career aspect to it. And where your compromises and your personal interactions and relationships in your work are going to also be very important and can really benefit. And for you, Aries, just like Scorpio, the other Mars-ruled person, Venus is like how all of your entire relationship dynamic revolves around Venus, right? With other signs, there are two planets that really rule it. So for example, for Cancer, Venus is still the Karaka of relationships, but Saturn is the 7th house ruler, right? So there are two planets that really have to do with their interactions with other people. But for Aries and Scorpio, it's all about Venus. They're all or nothing about their agreements, and it all revolves around Venus. So for you, Aries, look for a career and aligning your career with your dharma and your higher purpose to also be a big theme. That's your 9th and 10th houses, okay? For Taurus, Venus is your ruling planet and also your 6th house ruler. So it's going through your 8th and 9th houses. So this is really going to help you, Taurus, to work through your fears around compromises and your sense of identity that comes from kind of losing yourself in your agreements with other people, because you're ruled by Venus. And that whole thing is like, as I'm describing agreements and other people, you're like, yeah, that's life, right? It's like, no, it's not. It's your life, right? So, the 8th house is where things blow up and break, and the 9th house is where we really learn the highest lessons. So for you, Taurus, this is a really great time to learn these highest lessons, but it could come with some painful transitions and transformations, and where you have to face a lot of these painful truths and allow some things to just kind of blow up, which is the 8th house. So the 9th and 8th houses are really big for you, Taurus, right now. The transition from those things that you can't control and the greatest lessons that you learn as a result. Gemini, this is your 7th and 8th houses. So it starts in the 8th house for you, Gemini, which is about those things you can't control and that vulnerability. And then it goes back into your 7th house, which has to do literally with your agreements with other people and the compromises and really the showing up part, and your ability to actually form good agreements, which is what the seventh house is. So it's literally going retrograde in your seventh house of other people. So for you, Gemini, it's quite an auspicious transit in this regard. You might have some new relationship energy come in to actually even show you this more. But also, you can tend to be a bit commitment phobic at times, Gemini. And this is one of these things where, again, you could really get some life lessons about showing up, staying committed, even when it's difficult, even with the things that you can't manage or control. These are big themes right now. Cancer, this is the 6th and the 7th house. It starts in your 7th house of relationships. So if you're in relationship, Cancer, it's starting with some confusion right now, and you're wondering, if the agreements are good, and it'll be quite a bit of reflecting now for, through the end of March. Again, these are now transits that go from now until the end of March. This dynamic is going. But then Venus goes back into your 6th house, Cancer. Again, this is your 6th house of, maybe doing battle over these things and feeling like you're, sort of service and having to be of service. So, again, the 6th and the 7th houses are related this way, and it's going to show the need to not resent all the work that it takes to keep those relationships alive. And for you, Cancer, you have a little bit of this martyr complex and this kind of, all I do for you. Oh, I'm always the one. Drama. Maybe for you to encounter a little bit of that and realize it's hard work for all of us, not just you. Leo, this is the 5th and the 6th houses. So for you, Leo, it starts in that 6th house, which also, again, actually relationships can feel like that, can also feel like that, relationships are hard work, because the 7th house ruler, Saturn, also rules the 6th house. And so it's starting in that place of work for you, Leo, as well. So you're noticing all of the work and how much your individuality is kind of suppressed a little bit by the partnership and by the agreement. And you're saying, do I still like this? And then he goes back into your 5th house, and you're like, look at all the things I'm not doing, all the heart's desires that I'm not fulfilling, maybe just because of this person. Is there someone else that I'm more romantically looking for, or other things I'm not doing? So it's a big one to really make the relationship more in alignment with your heart's desire and your creativity and things like that, Leo. So it's a big one for you, Leo, too. It's big for all of us, obviously, but this one for you, Leo, too, because it goes back into your 5th house of your heart's desire, and then the 6th house of your effort and hard work. And then Virgo, this is happening in your 4th, your 4th and 5th house. So Virgo, this starts in your 5th house of your heart's desire and your creativity. This could be a very creative time for you, Virgo, where you're feeling very creative and very inspired even by this Venus slowing down and then going backwards in your 5th house, where you feel like you're really learning a lot about, your compromises and things like that. When it goes back into Sagittarius, it's going to be a little different. It's going to be much more emotional at that time. And rather than have it just be something that you feel like you're learning and that you can feel good about, it's going to just be more raw emotion and feeling, which is not always it's not as easy for you, Virgo. So get ready for that part of it, through, and through like the end of December through February. And because the feelings and emotions in our heart is the source of our passions and our heart's desire. So that's the 4th and 5th house connection, and you'll be experiencing that, Virgo. Then Libra, this is happening in your 3rd and 4th houses. The 4th house is about your emotion. So for you, Libra, it's starting out as being quite an emotional thing. But then it goes back into the 3rd house, which has more to do with your ideas, your intelligence, figuring things out, maybe even noticing how your interests and your desire to have a lot of options is also bringing a kind of emotional sort of burnout a little bit around this and around your feelings, and that your desire to want to be playful at times is also undermining your commitments and whatnot. So again, it'll be also a time to find out what you really want seriously and how much you're really willing to put yourself out there and do something different. Scorpio, this is your second and third houses. The retrograde starts in your third house, which is about your interest and, again, your ideas about your compromises and relationships and things like that. It goes back into your second house, which has to do with your values, your real core values, not just your interests, but your core values and principles. So it'll be a good time for you, Scorpio, to get real about how much your values and the things you value also really contribute to your ideas and the situations that you find yourself in. And so, again, that's the second and the third house, how our values, interests, how our values and whatnot lead to our interests and our ideas about those things. And of course, this is for your ascendant, your rising sign, like everything I do, not your moon sign or your sun sign, your Vedic rising sign. And now for for Sagittarius, this starts in your second house of values, but goes back into your first house, right? So the first house is about your truthful identity and your relationship with your desires in general and with your and with your agreements in general. So it starts in your second house, though, of your values and how much your values are reflecting your true nature and your true identity, Sagittarius. So Venus is quite a distracting planet at times. It can be disruptive. It can show where you get distracted by beauty and novelty when your deeper nature more has to do with teachings and higher principles. So are you living those authentically? Are you compromising your principles and values to have connection? If you are, this is going to be a big time for you to get clear about what's most valuable to you and how much you're living in alignment with those things. And with Capricorn, it's starting in your first house, which right now, as it goes retrograde, you're very much living this identity of, how much you have how much beauty and joy you have in your life. And that is being reflected in the confusion that you're feeling now. Do I have the connection I want, the relationship I want? Then it goes back literally into your 12th house, which is very much like the sort of underworld. And you need to go back in and really reflect on those things. That's what the 12th house is. It's the source of the first house. So for you, Capricorn, it's going to be a great source of introspection. You need to really be reflective and not just transactional, which is what you tend to be. And it's going to require a lot of introspection and solitude for you to really get the most out of it. For Aquarius, this is happening starting in your 12th house, which can be a time of confusion and not really knowing or being so sure of what you're doing in relationships and what your compromises are, whether they're good, what your agreements are about. Again, you might be somewhat confused about these things right now. And Venus goes back into your 11th house when it goes into Sagittarius. Is a time to really connect with something more universal and something less personal, more about, larger themes, even cultural themes, things that have to do with, service and whatnot. For you, Aquarius, it really has a more universal theme for you. But Venus also rules your 4th and 9th houses of teachings and higher wisdom. So you may really find this to be a time of not just relationship benefit, but also of your, larger contribution and your spiritual benefit as well. Venus is that kind of planet for you. And finally, Pisces, this happens in your 10th and 11th houses. And Venus it's exalted in your first house, but it's more of a functional malefic as the 8th house ruler. So for you, Pisces, it can show a time for you to really work through the distracting nature of Venus, and especially as it can serve and help your ambitions and your work and your career and things also. So Venus starting in the 11th house shows your focus on larger themes, larger cultural themes. And then it goes back into the 10th house, which shows the power you have, the impact you can make in the world, and things like that. And so it really is also another planetary shift that can really be more about something higher, not just personal for you, Pisces. So again, I hope this was helpful for people to hear. And again, this is always, if you know astrology correctly, you know that transits always come from the ascendant. And so these are the things that people should really focus on during that time and really notice. You know, I know you'll listen to 10,000 other videos between now and then, and you'll forget everything I said. Most of you, which is fine. Doesn't matter to me. I already know it. But those of you, the smart consumer, will pay attention to what I said and think about it. And maybe learn a little bit more about astrology as well, so that you understand the nature of these houses more. Because it's going to really be doing that. You should have recognized the house that it's in now and the pressure that you feel in that area of life. And then it's going to go back into where it just was. And there's a real opportunity for you to be working through these things for the next few months. Also, remember, it's the next few months. It's not, oh yeah, Sam talked about that 2 months ago. Is that still important? It's important until around the end of March. Some things happen, like it was the full moon yesterday, okay, and the cycle is about 2 weeks, but other things are transits that go on for months, and they hang over large portions of time and show big changes. So I hope this was helpful for everyone to hear, and that is about all I have to say. I'm not going to take any questions. I see people are coming in and saying some stuff here. Oh, the last thing I will say though is that you should get this 2020 forecast if you haven't got it. As you see, again, like I said here, one of the first things I talked about at the beginning of 2020 is this, when Venus turns direct, because again, this Venus turning direct is coming at the end, or at least it's at this point where we start to move forward with this whole shift, right? Again, you can't talk about the whole thing, but this is a point where it shifts. Again, we're starting the year with it retrograde. So on the 29th, it starts to move forward again. And then it's like, okay, now I feel like I can move forward with this thing I just explained. So that's very important. And I hope you all take it well. Someone said, super accurate for me. Thank you. You are welcome, Chiara. So you all take care.